Thank you, everybody, for coming. I'm Kimiko Mar. I'm the Executive Director of Japanese American Memorial Pilgrimages, and I am super excited to have Masaru Yoshimoto and his grandson, Cole Patterson, and hopefully some other family members and not just some random weird people who are making faces in the background, here to talk about Masaru's experience in Gila River. And I'm going to just pass it right off to you, Cole. So go ahead and introduce yourselves.
Right. Like you said, I'm Cole, and this is
That's grandpa.
yeah, grandpa. So let's say, I guess, I'm a junior in high school right now at Aragon, so a young guy, and
That's in San Mateo.
in San Mateo. And that's like a little bit older than he was when then Oji-chan was when he went to internment camp for some years older. So I guess we'll do is we have a little presentation. Let's see if I can get this to work. So this is just some background that Grandpa has, and we can, I guess, go like this. I'll let you take this one away here. So I don't know what we have, I guess. This is you, just like the whole deal.
So maybe I should explain what we're looking at here. On the upper right, that's the so-called father and mother when she arrived as the picture bride from Japan, Hiroshima. And father, they're sitting down, taken in San Francisco, where he went to meet her as she came in this great adventure, trying out a new life in a new country, speaking a new language, new religion, new cultures. Must have been quite adventurous and probably daunting for her. Father had been in America for several years now, trying to make a foundation. And like most of the men that came, started getting a little weary, continue working, building up a foundation monetarily, and saving the monies. But it was never really like what they had all dreamed, where you could pick up the gold off the streets and then after a while return back to the old country. But anyway, reality set in, and father wanted companionship among many of the bachelors. And so the picture bride was a way in which people were introduced and were able to start a legacy here in the new world, in the new country. And so that's the picture on the right when they were first married. And the picture on the left is father and mother at one of the homes that they had eventually were able to save during the incarceration period. It was a 80-acre ranch that my brother and the whole family developed and kept and had turned over to our neighbor during the internment process. We also had a ranch in Kingsburg, 40 acres, which we were able to sell. It was a little more challenging in that it was sandy, hilly, more difficult to tend to the vineyards. And so that was sold, and this ranch was kept, and that's where their picture was taken. On the lower right is a family picture where all of the children, surviving children, are there. You can see me in the middle, and I'll introduce the family in the back center, the oldest brother, Haruo, and then to the left of him, standing, Noboru, 2 years later, and then Matsuko on the far right, another 2 years later, and then on the far left, Yoshie. She's 2 years apart from Matsuko, and then I was kind of a love child afterthought. 8 years later, I came along, and that's me in the center. So that's the family picture. We did have one daughter that passed away at 9 months. She was the first child, but I'm sure that was a great disappointment to my mother, having come over here and wanting to start a family, but losing her first daughter that was born during the I think it was a Spanish flu period in that time, and that's when she lost her life. So that's so much on the background of the family. Here's another picture taken more recently. Well, by more recently, I would say in the let's see, maybe 80s or so, down in that area. O's brother on the right, and the second, Matsuko, in the pink. I think it was one of her celebrations that she was dressed up as a corsage. And then, Noboru is on the left in the photo. And then in blue is next sister, Yoshi, and then me standing right there.
Let's see. And this, I guess this brings us to the topic of today's discussion. So here, let me just, this is, you have the camp, right? You visited this recently.
Yeah, that's a picture of the desolate land that was for miles and miles, all a part of the Indian reservation of the Pima Indians. They lived in a town called Sangaton, about 5 miles from this area where Camp 1 and Camp 2, also known as Canal Camp, and I forgot what they call the second camp, but this is where one of the bigger relocation centers were located, straight in the sagebrush land of the Pima Indians reservation.
Okay, so the questions, right? So as a young guy, right, before the internment to the camp, when like the war was starting out, how are you living life? Do you remember like preparing, like going to life, or how you felt, or what was going on in your family at that time? Do you remember that, like how the dynamics were?
Okay, I guess you're referring to the Pearl Harbor incident, December 7th, 1941.
Yes.
And as a youngster at that time, 41 would be probably, I was in the third grade. And so things of that nature were something very foreign to me. And yet, knowing what disturbance it brought to the family, calmness and the fact that this watching my parents disposing of everything that might be Japanese oriented, the I guess they call it the kendo gear that we had, the mask, the pads, the wear that they used to have, that was all either burnt or buried. And as part of the requirements, being Japanese during these perilous times, we were required to turn in radios, photographic equipment, anything that might have been suspiciously looked upon as a war tool. And so we had to turn those things into the police department. And so that was part of the happenings during that time. And constant news were awaited by the families as to what's happening, what's going to be happening to us. And there was all kinds of rumors, I'm sure, which I had no part of, but I could imagine what the elders, the parents were all discussing and talking about during this time of big change.
Right. So I understand when they first started moving the people on the east, or no, more on the west, who are closer to the coast, you actually moved in with some family up near Reedley, right?
Yes, that's correct.
So that year before they sent the people more on the eastern part sent up, that was like where I would say you could feel more differences. Did that kind of carry over to your school life, or not so much with the youngsters?
Yes, so Cole, what really transpired was there were a lot of Japanese families living in the Central Valley, San King Valley, and because of that, they couldn't evacuate and relocate everybody all at once. We had the district fairgrounds in Fresno, and that's where people that lived on let's see, that would be the west side of the railroad tracks, the Southern Pacific Railroad tracks, or the parallel 99 highway at that time. It was a 3-lane highway. And so those that lived on the west were immediately incarcerated in the district fairgrounds, where you've heard the stories of horse stalls with fresh wastes and not the best of sanitary conditions, where they were put in. And we, in turn, were able to escape that initial relocation because we moved to a family, which was my eldest brother Haruo's wife's family, that had a parcel on the, let's see, that would be the east side. And that's where we spent 1 year, and have, by that move, we avoided being incarcerated in the district fairgrounds. But at the same time, we were delayed 1 year. And then finally, our marching orders came. And I remember as a child to my first train ride with the family and other families from Sanger, where we boarded. And then I remember the ride to Los Angeles, and remember the scenes of Los Angeles in the evening. And then the following morning, I think we choo-chooed out to Casa Grande, which is south of Phoenix, maybe 40 miles or so. And from there we debarked, and then were taken by buses to our relocation camp, which was in Gila, Arizona, on the Pima Indian Reservation.
That's right. So when you first arrived, like at the camp, living with life in the camp, would you say how are like the living arrangements and how kind of stuff went in that sense, or like how you guys reacted to it?
Yeah, how we
Overall.
reacted to it. You know, I don't specifically remember any particular reactions other than it was a time of confusion and change, and things were not settled. So I'm sure I had some anxiety as I thought back on those times. But I remember debarking and being assigned to one of the quarters in the barracks. And these barracks had 4 distinct rooms, a door on the 2 ends. And then on one side, there were 2 doors, which provided entry to the second and third unit of the barracks. So my father, my mother, myself, and my sister Yoshi lived in, I guess they call it 5B, A, B, C, D. So we lived in B, in the barrack number 5. And my brother Haruo and Shizuko, who were married, that's whose family's place we stayed in across on the east side of the tracks. They were in the next apartment. I guess that would have been 5C. And so I remember those 2 apartments. And then on one end was the Deguchi family. On the other end was Nakamura family from Kingsburg. And so that's where we got started and settled down. And just to give you an idea of what the layout was, the camp was composed of 27 blocks. Each block had 7 rows of barracks on one side and another 7 on the other side. And between these 2 rows of barracks were the men's facilities, the women's facilities, and then the laundry facilities. And then down the open area, we had an area where eventually a basketball backstop was with a ring, the hoop, the net was provided. So we had some sort of able to keep ourselves busy shooting the basketball. And along with that, there was a recreation hall parallel and opposite the mess hall. And so we had cooks that prepared our food, and that's where we all went to keep ourselves full in the tummy.
In terms of at the camp, how would you say your life was with like people your age as being more a youngster, like friends and like what you did to pass the time and have fun at the camp with more of the young guys? Like how did that go?
Yeah,
Any stories?
like any young Japanese family. There were children there of different ages. And so, as I recall, let's see, there was Benny Tanaka, Ben Katayama, and Franklin Nakayama. I think all three of them have passed on, but they were youngsters of my age, and we were able to meet and have some sort of friendship among them, among the ones that we met. Aside from playing on the grounds there, we had school that we also attended.
Right. I saw something pop up. Oh, hi, Uncle Cedric. So, Cedric wants to know, were the cooks like, were like military cooks that sent over from the government? Was it like people in the camp who cooked like maybe more Japanese food?
Yeah, I think it was people that were in the camps that were able to, because of their talent, obtain work and receive enumeration, which was probably in the low tens, $15, $14 a month. So we had Japanese cooks that prepared the food, the rice, and what was delivered by the trucks that came from the outside. And along with speaking about food, after a while, there were farmland that was cultivated and irrigated, where the internees took their turns in cultivating, taking care of the vegetables that were also served to the mess halls of the camp. And my father at that time was employed as a bookkeeper, keeping the hours of all the employees that worked on the farm. And so I do remember that.
It's interesting. So, was that a common thing? Lots of people working in the camp as to make money and keep themselves busy.
Yeah, it was kind of like a city out in the remote area, out in the desert of nothing. For you, any way you looked, there was at least 2 miles of nothing, just sagebrush. And so many people did find employment. We had plumbers because things were had to be kept with the water flowing and the waste flowing out. And so they had plumbers, we had electricians, and we had all of these were people of the interns, even doctors, dentists, nurses. And so it's like a miniature city in this camp. And there's people from the camp themselves that were talented were asked to provide these services.
So we have another one here while we're at it. Speaking of was this rotten or the quality of it? Was that more towards the beginning? Looks like Dinah's heard some things about that. Do you recall any?
The food itself, I guess when you're hungry, you eat. And at that age, you just eat to satisfy your energy needs. And I wasn't too much into quality or quantity. And there seemed to have been enough for everybody. And so we were well stocked, I would say. But one of the things the camp scene really disrupted the unity of the family, where we were used to all gathering around the table and having our dinner together as a family, as a unit. But that was broken up. And so people with different ages would get together and go and get in the line, get their food, and socialize among your peers rather than as the family unit. So that was a thing that was kind of broken up.
Interesting. Did that affect like overall? I mean, I guess you saw your families like when you went to bed in the barracks, right? But like the family like kind of dynamics, like kind of supporting each other. Did that play an effect in that? Did you support each other kind of as a family, you would say?
Yeah, I guess the sport in the family was always there. It was never outwardly shown. We're not touchy feely type of a culture, so we just when everybody time to go to sleep, we're all back in the barracks, and so at that time you could kind of reassure yourself that you're still a family, And that unity showed up in the barracks. And after waking up, of course, we had schools, and so children went to schools. Many of the adults, especially the elder adults, in order to keep themselves entertained, they had the game of black and white chips. I guess they were gold tablets, games that they waged among themselves to get busy. And so, and then in order to be a little creative, I'm sure after that type of construction, there's always a lot of wood and things left over. And so people were able to latch onto some of that, and probably through hammers or nails where they found, they were able to construct whatever they wanted to, maybe in way of tables that they could use in their barracks. And so people were creative. People had hobbies. They started carving wood, and in that area, the wood is very known for its density because of very little rain. And they used to call it ironwood, and people would pick up some of the remnants of the ironwood and sand it and carve it and make birds or whatever. And so the creative talent of the artistic people was always there and to be seen, keeping busy in that manner.
That's nice. Okay, that's see. Was there throughout like camp, were there like any occasions at all where the family kind of ate together or any of that, or was it all mess halls every day?
Yeah, it was mess halls every day. I don't remember any birthday celebrations or anything like that where we all got together and had a cake and candles. No, that was just never occurred to me. But we felt that we were still part of the family. Everybody had a home to go back to, and yeah, so it was that way in retrospect. But it was something that we all got used to.
Mm-hmm. Okay, let's see. Mitchell, for all the woodworking stuff that you're doing, was there like a tool loan program, or how did you guys get your hands on tools? Is it just what was had at the?
I think what people maybe might have brought with them, maybe knives and things like that. So, they did have a kind of one little barrack, which was kind of like a store, canteen store, where they sold things. So I'm sure some of that stuff might have been available there. Yeah, as far as tools, some of them I'm sure brought maybe some tools that they, felt that was necessary to have, and so I'm sure many of them brought their own tools.
Right. So would you say talk about family unity, like unity of the whole community, of the group of people who were brought into the camp, the internment camp? Was that like there? Could you see that noticeable in like kind of the whole Japanese community that was in the camp? Like how was that, would you say?
The community is in other words, the question is, what were the community effects in camp in the situation?
Oh yeah, did it affect it, or did it like
well,
culture stay?
I think maybe you're kind of alluding to what other social events or happenings took place. But they did have areas where Christians had their church, Buddhists had their one church, and of course there were Buddhist ministers that were not incarcerated as part of the original group of leaders that were really first removed from the community before the rest of us went into the temporary and the final relocation camps. So the community was downsized, but we did have the churches that we could attend. And some of the ministers were there. I remember Reverend Kimura was one of the ministers. And then we had lay leaders like Mikey Watsubo, and he was one of the leaders among the Japanese community. And he would give talks. And so yeah, that in that sense, there was a community of sorts, and in the religious area, and in the other sports arena, you might say there was the people that were really engaged in baseball. Baseball was a big thing among many of the people from Fresno, especially the Zenigura family. They had the father and the two sons that were very, very good at baseball. And I think they were in camp too, the other camp, and they had a big league. And I remember visiting. They would visit and play our baseball diamond. And so there was, sports that we could visit, not only baseball, but there were basketball leagues that started. And then among the grammar school kids, of course, we had football, touch football, and that was played on the ground without any uniform. But we had fun regardless. And other events that kept the cultural thing busy was in the one barrack parallel, but on the opposite side of the mess hall was a barrack that was kind of like a social hall. So I think in our barrack, it was used as a judo hall. So judo was expressed and learned and taught. And we had judo tournaments put on by the community of leaders. And I remember being in that tournament. And so there was a lot of activities that kept us busy. And even on Friday nights, we had movie nights. So they were able to, I don't remember the movies, but they had movies, and we would take our chairs, sit ourselves out in the open air, and they had kind of a stage there. And that's where the screen was. And we had movies there for the entertainment. Probably it was like on Friday nights. And so I remember the announcer at that time said, well, we have ice cream that's available. We have 4 flavors available. Ice cream, vanilla, 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 and vanilla. So that was a big laugh for everybody. So there was little treats like that was available to us.
There's a question about sports, or I guess we have that, but also, was there a golf course? Is that Sky Mitchell golf course at camp, I guess, out in all the open land?
Yeah, I don't remember golf. That was kind of beyond my thinking, but there might have been people with golf clubs. I don't know how they would have got it. I'm sure, yeah, there was no real golf course per se. There was a lot of burrowed holes that you could shoot the ball and the rock would fall in, because they had a lot of gopher-like animals that would make these burrows out there.
That's interesting. Okay, let's see here. Would you say, if you had all this camp, when you came back, how was the community then, or like the Japanese community bouncing back, kind of coming back? Would you say that they like were affected, or they like support each other in that sense? Or
Yeah, returning back after the war was over, eventually the word was out that the I guess you call relocation centers were closing. So the ones in Arkansas, Jerome and Rower, were closed first, and we had my sister Matsuko, married to Tokinomura. They Tokinomura, and like many of the, just to digress a little bit, like many of the men that were in camp, incarcerated, went to Chicago to help in the war effort. And they were working in industry, making whatever that the industry needed for the war effort. And so there was a lot of volunteers that went outside the camp after a couple of years to help in the war effort. And speaking of war effort, even in the camps themselves, there was camouflage net making. And my brother for a while was in one area of making these model small ships for the sailors and Navy personnel to be able to learn about the different types of destroyers, battleships, aircraft carriers. And so that was part of it, as I remember, them working on models to be used by the Navy personnel for their education. And what else? Yeah, the net making, the model making. I can't think of anything else, but there was a lot of things that were going on. And those that were of college age were able to, maybe they were interrupted in their college education, but they were able to, and I know friends of mine, the elderly friends, were able to go to Texas, University of Texas, and continue into their education. And I remember Shigeru Uchiyama, he was a mechanical engineer, and he went over there and continued his education. And when he exited from the camp, he went back to his farming, but there was opportunities for those in the education field, those who are in the construction of war effort, and of course there were many volunteers of military age that went and volunteered and made part of the famous 442nd Infantry Regiment that had success in Italy, France, and really made a name for themselves with their valor and their sacrifices to prove that they were real Americans. So we can all be proud of that.
Yes.
So going back to your question about returning back, how we were assimilated. As a kid, I didn't notice any discrimination because children are not aware of what's going on. It's more the adults. So there were families that were affected with maybe shotguns, writings on the street that says, Japs go home or do not come back, you're not welcome, painted on the roads. So there were things like that which the elder folks may have done. But as far as school age, myself being in the 8th grade as I returned, it was just like normal. There was no discrimination. We all just had fun in terms of educating ourselves. Teachers were nice to us. I remember one teacher, I missed the school bus because I didn't know which bus to get on. There's about 5, 6 buses that come to pick up the students after they pick up the high school students. And so I didn't want to get on the wrong bus, so I just waited, and Mrs. Bragg was nice enough to drive me home. So, there's a lot of good things that happen.
What was a question here? I guess we can go back to kind of camp life. Do you recall Eleanor Roosevelt visiting your camp?
Yeah, that was Eleanor Roosevelt. That's President Roosevelt's wife, who was very instrumental in her doing things for the country. And she did visit. And me, I had no interest in those kind of things. So I do recall there was a lot of preparation work, getting things ready. And my sister Yoshi was kind of a typist in the administration office. And I'm sure she was able to meet and see her and greet her. But she did visit the camp. And I don't remember seeing her, but the news of her approaching and visiting was big time information that was talked about in the camp at that time.
While we're at it, what do you remember about like kind of we were talking about schooling a little earlier, like your more primary schooling at camp and like how the teachers were and stuff like that.
Yeah, 5th grade, we had one internee instructor. His name was Mr. Kawa. He was a professor or teacher on the outside. And as an internee, he used his talents to teach the 5th grade for us. So as part of the 5th grade, I remember he being our teacher. And as part of being in that 5th grade, I remember we all took a picture in front of the school door on the steps. I still had the photo someplace at home. And I remember one of the top students there was good at math. And so they had a contest between the teacher and the top student. in working on a problem to see who could do it first. And so it kind of a memory of one of the incidents at school, which I remember. The sixth grade was Mrs. Rennick. Her husband was a professor and principal of the high school, which was adjacent to our grammar school. So she was a teacher there. And seventh grade, in my third year there at school, Mrs. Osgood, she was from the southern state. And I remember she was kind enough to bring some boiled eggs for Easter. And we had some fun for Easter egg hunt. It was kind of a field trip that we took. So I remember that incident. And as far as the high school, I remember they had the drama class and they put on a performance of HMS Pinafore. Is one of these very famous British musicals. And they had a wonderful presentation with all the costumes and everything. And I'm sure the teachers from the outside brought clothes and regala and costumes and so on. And it was a wonderful performance that I remember for all this time. So good memories too.
So good question here. Oh, about camp. Did you guys were you able to speak Japanese like in camp? Was it a thing that maybe the people who ran it or
Oh,
what's the
yeah.
situation on that?
Yeah, well, my mother was pretty much into education, so she knew of, I think the family's name was Baba. They lived in Camp 3, Block 3, and she had me going over there, picking up and learning some of the Japanese, which was a continuation of my grammar school, not grammar school, but Japanese school at Kingsburg, where we originally had our home. And at Kingsburg, we had, I think, Saturday Japanese classes, which I remember attending. And so there was a continuation of a little bit that my mother encouraged me. So during the time that I was separated when I went into the armed forces, serving overseas, I used to write letters in Japanese in the simple alphabet, IUL, and we used to correspond, mother and I, and kind of keep up on what was going on in the outside world after departing from the camp life itself.
Oh, good question. So the Japanese teachers who weren't Japanese, like the ones through the government, did they or the American ones, did they live in the camps or what was the situation with them?
I'm sure they lived off campus. They must have commuted every day. Yeah, I would think so. Although I never remember seeing them driving in a car, but yeah, I never thought about much about where they lived. But I'm sure they were present every day, so they must live close by.
Right. Okay, let's see here. We'll go on. We can think about. So obviously, we talked about kind of how things went with the community when you got out. Do you? Oh, you know what? You recently visited, right? You visited the camp. Do you have anything specific like you brought up or you remembered about the camp from seeing like the site again, or maybe just all about like what seeing it again was like?
Well, we had the two camps, Camp 1 and Camp 2. Camp 2, one of the, I guess, residents of that area was Japanese, and he was very much a part of the Pima Indian military group, veterans. And through his effort getting along with the Pima Indian Native Americans, they were able to, on a hilltop at Camp 2, make a nice monument, circular, out of concrete with pillars. And then in this circle, a block built up with a plaque commemorating the incarceration, the number of people, the years, and little historical data. And so that's where we had our commemoration and reunion under the auspices of the Prima Indian tribe, which that land is part of theirs as a separate entity apart from the United States. It's like a nation of its own. They have their own police, their governance. They work on their farms now, which is now irrigated. And so they're doing quite well. And they were very welcoming of us visiting. And they even had tours for us, those that wanted to visit Camp One. Camp One is about 4 miles away, but there's hardly anything left there. But when we were able to join on the tour there, we were able to see the big dike, which is about 15, 20 feet tall, which kept the floodwaters away from the area there. And we saw the remnants of a sumo, I guess you would call it a sumo stand, where you could see the outline of the ring and where they used to have sumo among the participants. I don't remember ever seeing any sumo, but we saw the leftover of the sumo itself, the arena and the build-up area, and some of the posts that were still there. And we stopped at many koi fish ponds that were still there, that were built with, I'm sure, cement that was left over from the construction. And so those are some of the things that we got to see. And I shared stories with the native Pima persons that took us on the tour. And I told them of one incident where one of the elderly internees had made a net about 4 feet high with squares maybe about 2 inches. And he took us, 3 or 4 children, and showed us how he would set the net on top of the dike. And so you could imagine a dike that's 15 feet high, and then on top of it, a 4-foot length of netting for maybe 20, 30 feet. And I remember as the birds approached that area, we helped to shoo the birds, and they would fly up the incline and into the net. And that's how we were able to capture the birds. And sharing that with one of the native persons there. And he was also mentioning the fact that that's how they would capture some of their animals that they would use for food. So, we kind of shared mutual experiences, different cultures used the same principle to get some food. So that was a nice interchange with some of the native people that were there that took us on the tour.
It's cool. Got some more questions here. Oh, about natives, actually, were there ever interactions between like the Japanese Americans in camp, like during the camp, and the tribes
Okay.
at that time?
Yeah, like I remember telling you about the stage where we had the screen for the movies. We had many talented people within the camp that would put on shows. I remember one where they had the bar, and then they would do their somersaults and flips and rounds and all the different things that you could do on the bar. And so that was entertainment within with new members and by members of the internees. And there was this one exchange more coming to our camp by the Native American. And they had their full regalia with their headgear and their hoops. And I remember the wonderful dance that they presented in their native costumes. And it was a very rewarding and memorable experience where they shared their culture with us.
That's cool. Another question here. Oh, after returning from camp, did your family, like your parents, did they ever talk about the camp or later about like discussing like what happened, or they just kind of carried on, or like how'd that go within the family?
As far as the returning from the camp, we found the ranch still there. weed infested, and it was not really maintained the way we would have maintained it. But I'm sure that we were probably happy that at least we had something to come back to. And the neighbors that took care of it was a German family that they were not the richest, but at least they took care of the place. And I'm sure they must have paid the taxes. And as far as the grapes that were harvested, and I'm sure it was dried on trays to make raisins. I don't know the financial, whether they made restitution to us and what the finances were. I never did ask my brother or my father, but I'm sure there was some remuneration. And so at least we had a place to go back to. And many people had a very difficult time because their property was seized, and maybe because taxes were not paid, the county has to have their income, so they have the auction, and many of their farms were sold. And I guess if it was sold above what the taxes were, that would have gone to the family. But a lot of times the county would keep the total amount unless you ask for it. So that's kind of tricky there. But there were families that were very kind neighbors that paid for the taxes, made good financial remuneration, and were above board and took care of it. And so some families came back to the ranch and things were just like before, like they took a vacation. Not a vacation, but anyway, they were gone, which against their will, of course. And so that was some of the stories that I remember hearing. But coming back, it was kind of traumatic for our parents and our adults because, the war idea of the war was still in their minds, and many families, I'm sure, may have lost loved ones. And so to see us coming back and, yes, assuring or assuming our relationship with the enemy at the time, it might have went some, thoughts that were not completely welcoming, but that we finally made the adjustment, and so that was part of history.
So was the property owned like by you or one of your American citizen brothers? Like the property, I guess your family or like some of the other family members who came in, or this like your parents and their family as well, right?
I think you're hitting on one little sore point. After a while, legislation was passed that prohibited Japanese people, unless they were citizens, from owning land. And so because of that reason, farms were purchased in the young, maybe a friend of their family with a son that was of mature but a major age, in which many families bought the ranch in their names. In other words, they bought the ranch in the name of the son of some friends. And so that's how they were able to at least purchase the land, although the land's entity ownership was in another family. But
they settled that.
Yeah, they settled it all above board.
Let's see. Let's help you. How did your family feel about? Oh yeah. So your brother, right? He went to serve in the 442nd. How did your family feel about him going off and like what happened when he came back? Because
okay, yeah, I remember distinctly. Noboru, the second oldest son, was inducted. He was called for duty before incarceration began. So he was in the army. And I'm sure he floated around quite a bit because the army didn't know exactly what to do with him. So I remember him going from one army camp to another until things got settled down in the army, where they said we're going to have a defense unit composed primarily of Japanese Americans that volunteered for the camp, those that were inducted earlier, and then some from the Hawaiian mainland. Those were that came over, and the formed the 442nd, and they went on to do their big thing and make a name for themselves and made everybody proud as to what they accomplished, proving and showing their loyalty.
Mm. It's very nice. Okay, I guess let's see. As after the camp, I understand that there was some years later reparations were like passed in. How do you see like what do you think about that? Do you think about like the reparations and the
Yeah,
government and what they did? What are your thoughts in general about it?
but I think it was, well, what would you say? It was an effort to make amends to a mistake in history, but it was a long, drawn out process. Many years, many years after we were allowed to return, but it was a process of hearings that they had throughout various cities where there were Japanese families that Congress approved. And these hearings brought up the fact of what really took place, that there was no incident of any treasonable act by the Japanese. And so this was brought up, and it required education of Congress. Congress by that time were all new. They were probably distant from the war effort. So it was an educational process that these hearings provided to our members of Congress. And there was a lobbyist, Mike Masaru, who was very dynamic. And plus, we had Congressman Matsunaga, Mineta, quite a number of that were very instrumental that got along with Congress that helped the process. And eventually, the legislation was passed to allow for those that were still remaining and alive to receive compensation for the wrong that was committed. And we received from President Reagan at that time a letter of apology along with the compensation that was rendered to those that were still living and with us that survived the incarceration incident. So that was part of the making amends, you might say, in making things right. And so it was an educational process which took time, but it really did pass.
Okay, let's go through here. We have your brother he enlisted and like he enlisted into the war. Did he and like when did he enlist?
Yeah, he was called to duty. He didn't volunteer. Yeah, that was before the war even started, before Pearl Harbor. And so he was part of the forces that he saw action, I believe primarily in Italy. And we were in camp at that time. And so we got the telegram of the sad news that he was wounded in the war and he was being treated. He received a wound, a shrapnel wound in the back of his neck. And so it was a sad day when we got the telegram in Gila, Arizona, where we were incarcerated. And let's see, before that, he visited camp. He visited us, I remember, as a soldier, came over and visited the family. And so then he got sent overseas, got wounded, and then through rehabilitation, he was okay and able to go to some GI school and became a plasterer in Los Angeles. Even at that time, it was very hard, educated or even as a serviceman, to be recognized and to be offered employment opportunities. So we had a lot of Nisei citizens that were educated, had a master's, PhD, even had a hard time finding employment at that time. So, things were not always going rosy for the Americans of Japanese descent. But we all stuck it out. We did our best and persevered. And now we see the third generation and the fourth generation are the winners of our travail and our hardship and difficulties that we have faced.
So it looks like we are getting towards the end. So yeah, we have some. And yeah, what would you say? Yeah, just like a perfect time, just like we have here. What do you think? Maybe like your grandchildren, like me, but like maybe young people in general. What do you think they should like learn or like advice from these experiences in general? What do you have for all of us on that?
Well, I think it's a cultural thing to be educated, to get the best results of your potential. You know, whether it's in music, whether it's in arts, whether it's in scientific mathematics, you know, be educated, be smart. That's part of our culture to be the best that you can. And so I would say to anybody that's listening and watching to be the best that you can and reach out to people, be good, be nice. And because when you go up, you don't want to be hurting people because you may be coming down one of these days. So yeah, reach out to everybody, educate yourself, do the best that you can. And whatever thoughts you put in your mind, that's where you're going. So you always have good thoughts that you want, see yourself in that direction that you want, and think about where you want to go, where you want to be. But the basic is be educated, be the best for society. Yeah, reach out, and be nice to people.
See, I guess we are here for this one last thing here about specifically to close up the experiences from the camp. How would you say to apply that to like the importance or like have us learn from that?
What do we learn from that?
Or like in camp, like the whole incident,
Well, there's a Japanese word saying gaman. So, we just bared with what we had to bear. We didn't fight it. We didn't do anything radical. We just went with the flow and bared with the best that we can. And then things returned back to normal. And so, you just, there are times when you have to just go with the flow. You can't do anything radical. You can't set the world on fire. You just don't have the means. People's thoughts are against you, so you have to realize the situation and make the best of it.
Interesting. Well, there we go. That's any other questions or
Could I ask a question?
Sure, you could ask anything.
You might have been young at that time during when you were in camp, but I was wondering whether the feeling that maybe among the adults, if there was like sadness or anger or frustration, or whether it's just gamang and just shoganai and just do what you had to do.
Yeah, I'm sure there was, we are not the same. Every person reacts differently. So I'm sure every feeling that you mentioned was felt by many. And but the overall was the gaman aspect of it. Make the best of the situation. You're almost powerless with the government against you. And the government is always all powerful. And you have to sometimes grin and bear it and make the best of the situation. So yeah, it was a tough situation. And it was very difficult for many of the farmers as well as city folks that had stores, they had inventory. You were maybe given 2 weeks at the best to get rid of it. So it's almost like fire sale, giving it away. And so it was a tough time for many. For farmers whose crop were ready to be harvested, and you can't harvest it, you put in all that effort throughout the year, but you have to leave in maybe 1 day, 2 days. And so there was a lot that was lost by many people that had nice property in Portland, Oregon, or in Seattle, in what is now downtown, that they had to evacuate and maybe sell. Nobody would buy their property at that time. So, these were areas where the city has grown around. And so there are a lot of choice properties that were held by many of the East Bay folks that were, lost because of the war and what they had to go through.
We have one from Jan as well here. Regarding reparations, yes. So obviously the first generation internees, right, the ones who had passed who weren't with us anymore. Was there arrangements for them, or what was the details on that?
So the details on that was that we had the legislation passed for reparations, but then we had to have a little lengthy time to get the appropriations made and then the actual disbursement of the appropriations. So it was not a quick 1, 2, 3 thing, but it was laborious, one step after the other. And those that were passed on were not, of course, able to get any reparations whatsoever. I was completely lost to them.
Okay.
I have one question.
Yes.
Can we see pictures of racing? I want to see some running photos. I heard you're a runner.
Of me?
No. Weren't you? Weren't you racing?
Oh, that was a.
Oh, were those not in the?
That was
Yeah, I want to see.
Well, hold on. Well, we have one question from Uncle Cedric here. This might be a technical. Let's see here. For the parents born in Japan, was there ill will as to why Japan attacked the U.S.? Hold on. Let me just read this.
back to that comment. Let's go ahead.
Right, so look, he knows mom said the US and England had done colonization around the world, and the argument was that Japan was doing the same. So like was there ill will as to why Japan attacked the United States, or like within the family, how would they think of that? Or kind of
What did the family think of the bombing of Pearl Harbor?
or kind of just like the attacks and like that sort of thing. Yeah, I guess the bombing of Pearl Harbor.
I don't quite understand the comment on the question, but I'm sure when you talk to the military people that decided to drop the bombs on Pearl Harbor, they had their own thoughts and affected Japanese, Americans in regards to that because it affected us. And so I'm sure we had some, severe thoughts and comments on that act, which, was purely militarily. But I think Admiral Yamamoto, or whoever was behind it, did mention the fact that they are going to be waking up a giant. And so that really did get our efforts together as a nation. So as a democracy, you don't operate like a communist country where you make a decision and you act on it. We have to wait a little time to get people together. And in one sense, the bombing of the Pearl Harbor allowed for the country to become united behind a war effort. So there was, some question as to, and I think the communications among the ambassadors and Japan was broken. So the United States knew what was going on. And there was even stories where there was a report of airplanes flying towards the Pearl Harbor, but that was not carried forth because I think in some sense we may have known that something was up, something was going to be happening at Pearl Harbor. But anyway, politics is such that we don't know what's happening to one of the leaders itself. We're just kind of the recipients of their actions.
Hi, Uncle Mike.
Yes,
I can't get my camera to work. Sorry, otherwise you could see me. I wish I had Cole on this end. But sorry, Kimiko, I do want to see the running pictures. But I guess a big question for me is like life inside camp, where every pretty much people or the family members hung around with people of their generation. You talked about like the mess hall and everyone's eating arrangements. So I'm just thinking, was it difficult for Issei parents to like discipline their kids? Because like you don't want to let a child cry. Japanese are don't want to impose on other families. So if you had your own ranch, you'd let your kid just, if they were being spoiled, just let them cry. But in camp, you don't want to bother other people in barracks really close to you. So do you find that, do you think now as an adult that it affected like how I guess Japanese American families would raise their kids?
From a parent standpoint, as
Hmm.
long as they didn't bring any trouble, they were happy.
I
So
see.
we had no opportunity to get in trouble, really. I mean, we just played and had fun, go to school, come back home,
I
eat our
see.
2 meals. So it was kind of a situation which broke the family unity in that, daylight time, but in the evening when everybody is back home, ready to hit the sack, well, that's where I think our family unity comes back, and we don't get in trouble. So everybody was pretty well okay with the way we were
I
acting.
see. I see. Yeah. I know mom, your sister, would tell me that camp was a lot of fun because if you imagine someone 18, 19 and just hanging around with their peers all day long, must have been a good time in some ways for her. Yeah. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you for the question. Oh, I think you wanted to know something about my running. Would you show me
Yes.
the picture?
That's right. Yeah. Here. So I'll have to go.
So at the university, not university, I guess
That's college.
College of San Mateo,
Mhm.
they have an annual track meet for different categories of age, like 20 to 30, 30 to 40, 40 to 50, and then 90 and above. So thanks to my daughter Stephanie, she entered me in I think it was once around the lap, and then 100 meter, and maybe it was a 50 meter. Anyway, 3 races. And so I was the only one that entered the category. So I was number one gold star in all 3 categories. So I got 3 medallions.
And we got 100, 100, 150. For that.
Yeah. So that's me running.
Mhm.
That's the story of the races. Any more questions? Well, anyway, I do recall some of the people that were incarcerated. They had this loyalty question. I don't know if anybody knew about that. So the loyalty question was 3 main questions. Do you forsake your allegiance to America? Would you serve in the army of the United States? And I forgot the third, but it was a loyalty question, kind of tricky. And some people said that the way we were treated, how can we be loyal to the United States? And so those maybe that answered in one fashion were grouped and transported to Tule Lake. And of those that went to Tule Lake, some of them had maybe stronger feelings towards Japan. And those that did go there at the end of the war, when people were allowed to go home, they were also given the option to go back to Japan. So some of those did go back to Japan. And when you have a defeated country with shortage of food, and here comes 5 more mouths to be fed, you're not welcomed at all. And so it was a traumatic experience for the people in Japan as well as those that left and went back to Japan. So I've heard stories of that nature that they were not welcomed over there. There's no food to be had, and it was a period of reconstruction. So it was a bad state for everybody. But as I think back, Japan is a large country, and I could imagine people living maybe in Hokkaido or up in the northern part of Japan. Maybe their soldiers, their sons went into the army as fighters, but I'm sure they had, if they had a farm, they probably did okay during the war. But it's those that were living in the city that really were affected. But as you know, the Pacific War was one of island hopping from Philippines up towards eventually Midway and so on up to Okinawa. The Japanese culture is such that they're very mild, except when they are soldiers, they give their lives away freely. And so the U.S. Army, as they were island hopping and winning over the one island chain after the other, the question of whether we're going to have to invade Japan or not was the ultimate question. Even in Okinawa, many of the intelligence service Japanese talked to those that were in the caves in their native Okinawa language to tell them to come out because we're not going to hurt you. They couldn't believe it, but many did come out and they were treated with respect. It was completely opposite with what they were indoctrinated. If you don't take your own lives, you're going to be savagely decimated, hurt, and gotten rid of. So there was a big clash there in terms of what the enemy thought and what the conquering army thought in terms of the people that were there on the island. So there was a lot of lives saved in that one sense. And the question is, do we still have to invade Japan itself? And so by this time, we had won the war between Germany and the United States in the development of the atomic bomb in, I think that was in New Mexico. And Franklin Delano Roosevelt died in office. And at that time, President Truman took over. He was a haberdasher. He worked in a clothing store. He was a man of strong faith and good decisions. And it was presented to him, how do we end this war? Do we invade Japan and suffer a lot of casualties? Or do we use this bomb to end the war once and for all? And some of the stories I heard was that he gave the go-ahead to use it because that would save our lives in terms of soldiers. And so they dropped the bomb, and that was Hiroshima. And then we didn't hear much from the military. They dropped the second bomb. Then I heard stories that we gave permission for one, but they didn't have two. But they used both bombs, and eventually Japan capitulated. And so that was the end of the fighting and the resolution of the war.
Well, thank you so much. This has been by far the chattiest chat that we've had this whole Tadaima. So thank you, everybody. You listened when I said be chatty. Thank you, thank you. And thank you for both of you, coming and sharing your stories. And I think obviously it's kind of awesome that family members got to ask questions. I hope that they're questions that they've never asked you before, because I think that's pretty cool.
Very
Actually.
true.